I actually was one of the earlier people that smoked pot, because I graduated in 1964. So I was smoking pot in 1964. I tried it, nothing happened. Tried it again, I thought, whoa, I like this stuff.
Everybody was super paranoid because of the laws, and so you stuffed towels under the door to make sure that no smoke would get out of the room. And we had, I guess, a nickel bag of some very dry, I'd say, and we smoked it. And I had an awful time choking and coughing on the smoke.
Was approached by a street entrepreneur who said, "You're tired, and would you like some dirty books, and I'm tired." And so he said, "Well, I guess we can't do business." And he started walking off, and I said, "Senor, momentito," and then asked him if he could supply some of the marijuana, and he knew what it was. And yes, no problem. Come with him in a taxi, and we would go and get some.
During the social movements of the 1960s, a generation of American young people rebelled against their elders. Their music, hair, clothes, and values were all rejections of the world their parents lived in. They called themselves hippies.
I was the total hippie. I renounced wealth. I renounced greed. I renounced ambition. I renounced rivalry. I wanted to live in harmony with everything and everybody, and quite frankly, I was a flower child. It was the early days, and people were into alcohol, and I never really cared for the drug. And we used to have groups we called the juicers, those were the alcoholics, and the heads.
The heads were the hippies. The drug they chose was marijuana, and marijuana was against the law. Those were troubled times, with protests against the war in Vietnam and protests against the drug laws. Vietnam was finally ended, but the war on marijuana continues to this day. For decades, marijuana activists have been fighting the laws that define them as criminals. In March of 1991, a group of them gathered at the California Democratic Party convention. They were looking for allies among the delegates and the politicians, their goal, to legalize marijuana. Some people signed petitions, others listened, most just passed them by. The activists were hardly successful. Still, most remained optimistic about the future of their movement. The movement was energized the previous summer when a state panel said people who use marijuana should be allowed to grow their own. The pot lobby was pleased, but then became outraged. The state attorney general had forced the deletion of the recommendation from the panel's annual report.
Sure, we felt that this was censorship, but I don't think we were terribly surprised. The only resistance to change, other than the resistance by uninformed members of the public, comes from the enforcement industry, from people, lawyers and police types, who have a vested interest in maintaining the size and apparent importance of this problem.
Marijuana, like alcohol, is an intoxicating drug. The plant is commonly known as hemp. The scientific name is cannabis. Most just call it pot, weed, reefer, or grass.
Chicago lawmen seize a 4-acre field of marijuana. Retail value, $4 million. And they face the problem of disposing of the illicit crop before it goes to seed. Sheriff Lohman's answer? Call in the Marines. Marijuana is a weed and spreads like crabgrass once it goes to seed. But 3 Marines armed with flamethrowers live up to the Corps' boast. They have the situation well in hand.
Operation Green Sweep continues despite the local outcry of many. Spread out over the 60,000-acre Kings Range National Conservation Area, troops from the Federal Bureau of Land Management, the Army, National Guard, and other federal, state, and local agencies.
We want to send a very strong message that we will not tolerate drugs on public lands.
In media reports, as in the halls of Congress, the marijuana issue is cloaked in the language of war. At the United States Senate, former Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates testified that casual users should be shot. We're repeatedly told that marijuana is a dangerous drug, but medical and criminal justice experts have long disputed this claim. In 1970, President Nixon appointed a commission to resolve the marijuana question. But even before the commission released its report, Nixon had made up his mind.
As you know, there is a commission that is supposed to make recommendations to me about this subject. In this instance, however, I have such strong views that I will express them. I'm against legalizing marijuana. Even if the commission does recommend that it be legalized, I will not follow that recommendation.
1 year later, the commission released its report, its conclusions. There is no evidence that experimental or intermittent use of marijuana causes physical or psychological harm. There is no reported case of a single human fatality in the United States proven to have resulted solely from the use of marijuana. Marijuana does not cause violent or aggressive behavior or crime. The present level of marijuana use in American society does not constitute a threat to the public health. The overwhelming majority of marijuana users do not progress to drugs other than alcohol. The report's recommendation that possession of marijuana for personal use no longer be an offense. Congress failed to adopt the Commission's recommendation.
This is part of a pattern that the government has studied the marijuana issue any number of times, and the reports always come back against criminalizing marijuana, and the reports are always ignored.
In fact, the Nixon report was not the first official marijuana study. The U.S. military had studied soldiers who used it in the 1920s and 30s. In 1944, a report was issued in New York City by the Mayor's Committee on Marijuana. And in 1982, the National Academy of Science released its report. Each report contradicted popular claims about the drug's dangerousness, but they did little to change government policy.
Marijuana is different from the other drugs. It causes some individual damage, very limited, causes a great deal of societal damage because it's made illegal. But the reason it's so popular and so widely used is the same reason that alcohol is popular and widely used. It's suitable for use as a social drug. If an individual has to choose between the two drugs, or if society has to choose, I must say that I find marijuana less harmful.
Now, what's wrong with you? Tonsillitis?
Appendicitis.
Yeah! Nobody's died of tonsillitis around here for a while.
Appendicitis.
Nothing to worry about. Scalpel?
What if the joint were in somebody else's hand, like your surgeon, your lawyer, or your local policeman? Would you still say marijuana is harmless?
Now, let's see if I can still make a straight line.
Oh, those are great. Those
How
are
much you want for
fantastic.
What'd you get? Stickers? Oh, wonderful.
I'm going to be getting rid of them for free. That's all I can do for the next couple of weeks is give them out for free.
After the failure at the Democratic Convention, Dennis Peron organized a strategy session for the California Hemp Initiative, which would give the state's voters a chance to legalize the drug. Volunteers set out to gather enough signatures to qualify the measure for the November 1992 ballot.
I wanted to talk about some of the problems that I'm facing in Sonoma County, which is that people are expressing that they're afraid to circulate the petition. They're asking, you know, can somebody else sign it if I get the signatures, because they're afraid to sign as the circulator. A lot of people are expressing that they're even afraid to just sign the petition. And I think that would be fruitful for us to when we're doing press releases to acknowledge this in the media, that this is one of the biggest problems that we face.
You know what that does? It scares more people into not signing it.
Think so?
I know it does.
Why?
Because if you
That's
say,
what I
well,
want
other
to know
people are
what-
scared, they must have a good reason.
Hey, well, if you don't get the signatures, that's what we're going to
For one
claim.
thing,
Dennis, however, wasn't scared. He was angry and determined to tell the world he liked marijuana and had every right to use it.
So I believe that this drug does change you, and it does change your outlook on things. And that is why it's a way of life, because once you have a changed outlook, you can't go back to the old ways of thinking. And so it is frightening to the public that, hey, well, all of a sudden we're going to have a bunch of people questioning, bottom line, questioning the way it is. And it is frightening, and that is why marijuana is illegal. It has nothing to do with whether this is a dangerous drug, because we have dangerous drugs all over our society. That cigarettes and alcohol, they kill more people than will ever. All the illegal drugs combined will ever kill. So we're not really talking about drugs, and we are talking about the way of life.
It was the event of the year, the Earth Day Hemp Expo, a celebration of both marijuana and its source, the hemp plant, a chance to publicize and collect donations for the California Hemp Initiative.
We're now making hemp seed oil paint, which would be a toxic-free form of paint. We're making cooking oil, cosmetics, and a few other products right now. We should have cellophane done by June.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This stuff is delicious. This stuff is good. I was amazed. It's hemp seed. It's hemp seed ground up, stone ground hemp seed. That you can. It's high in nutrition. It's really high in protein, and you can put it in bread and stuff. And I knew all that, but I didn't know it tasted good. I figured you'd have to cover up the taste or something. It's great. It tastes good. Yeah, delicious.
A world driven by hemp, where hemp supplies you with your food and your energy and your building materials, everything from hemp. It's a wonderful utopian little vision. It doesn't represent a future that I think is likely to happen in itself, but as a vision and a way of inspiring people, and it lends itself to all sorts of aesthetics and theatrics that are fun to get into.
The Hemp Initiative strategy was designed to show that the plant has many uses, such as making clothing and fuel, but the central goal was still the same: marijuana legalization. At the end of the expo, activists performed a play using transcripts from congressional hearings in 1937, when the first bill was passed to outlaw marijuana.
This bill was introduced by me at the request of the Secretary of the Treasury. Representatives of the Treasury Department are here this morning to explain the bill.
My name is H.J. Anslinger. I am Commissioner of Narcotics in the Bureau of Narcotics in the Treasury Department. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee, this traffic in marijuana is increasing to such an extent that it has become the cause for the greatest national concern.
Harry Anslinger's former job was enforcing prohibition. Now he was the nation's top officer enforcing drug laws. Anslinger almost single-handedly convinced Congress to outlaw marijuana. His only significant opposition came from a doctor who represented the American Medical Association.
My profession is that of a practitioner of medicine and of legal medicine. I have combined the two. If you want to class me as an expert, you might class me as a medical legal expert.
My favorite Character in the 1937 Tax Act hearings, William C. Woodward, M.D., LLB. Longtime lobbyist for the American Medical Association, appeared before the Congress that was quite hostile towards him.
Although Woodward argued the drug was not a menace and even had legitimate medical uses, he was no match for Anslinger, who claimed it caused unspeakable crimes of violence. When the bill was passed, it hardly caused a stir. In 1937, many Americans had never even heard of marijuana. Among Mexican migrants in the Southwest and African Americans who worked on the docks of New Orleans, marijuana had been gaining popularity since the turn of the century. Storyville, the red light district of New Orleans. It was the birthplace of jazz music, where a whole new culture became intertwined with marijuana. It was also the birthplace of Louis Armstrong, one of the greatest jazz musicians. But jazz had its enemies, people who said it was dangerous and immoral, jungle music. And many musicians smoked a lot of marijuana. In Los Angeles, Armstrong himself was arrested for possession and spent 9 days in jail. As the drug became associated with the jazz culture, it seemed increasingly threatening. One prominent New Orleans doctor warned in 1931 that marijuana use in America had become epidemic. It spread due to the non-white population. The dominant race in most enlightened countries are alcoholic, he said, while the races and nations addicted to hemp have deteriorated both physically and mentally. Stories also appeared in tabloids, books, and dime store novels, blaming the drug for sex crimes, madness, even murder. In 1936, few people saw the film Reefer Madness, but it mirrored an unquestioned social consensus that endures to this day. Marijuana spells danger.
The medical uses of marijuana or cannabis prior to 1937 or 1940 was quite extensive. And this is an empty bottle of the tincture that was probably made by Merck Sharp and Dome about 1929. It was primarily an analgesic and sedative with some relief for chronic pain, and we now know that it is an agent that prevents or controls vomiting.
Todd Mikuria, M-I-K-U-R-I-Y-A.
Would you prescribe marijuana for your patients?
If I could, I would, but the physicians have been precluded from prescribing since it was taken away as a result of the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. Totally inappropriately, and as a result, we're suffering with the government fictions that it has no or very little medicinal redeeming importance, but it's a lie. It's all a lie.
My name is Dennis Peron, P-E-R-O-N, proponent of the medical marijuana initiative.
Okay, how many signatures do you have?
Okay, we're here today to turn in 16,500 signatures to legalize marijuana as a medicine. We fought for cancer, HIV, glaucoma. We collected these signatures for 6 months, and today we're turning them in.
After the hemp initiative failed to make the state ballot, activists tried to qualify a new measure for the San Francisco city ballot, but Proposition P focused solely on marijuana as medicine. Prop P was a compromise, an attempt to salvage the failed California Hemp Initiative. Prop P made the ballot, but even if it passed, the question remained, would it bear any tangible fruit?
Well, I must admit, legislatively, it is barren. All it is making a simple recommendation to the city of San Francisco via the California Medical Association and the state legislature that San Francisco is on record as stating that we want marijuana reinstated as a medicine for those that need it. It was inspired by my late best friend called Jonathan West, who died within the year. And he used marijuana as his main medicine. He had AIDS. And when he died, of course, I was very shaken up. He's been my best friends for 12, 15 years. And lived with me for that long. And this is my eulogy for him. To see marijuana as medicine for people that really need it.
There are, in fact, 14 Americans who do use pot legally. Each one had to fight to get permission, since officially marijuana has no medicinal value. Bob Randall was the first to convince the government otherwise. His sight had been threatened by glaucoma. Normal medications hadn't helped. Pot did. In 1975, after Randall had started to grow his own, he got arrested. As he prepared for trial, he made a stunning discovery. The government had known about medical studies showing that the drug could be helpful in treating glaucoma.
To find out that the federal government has known for a period of, at that point, 5 years, that marijuana, an inexpensive medication, can help prolong sight in the leading cause of blindness in the United States, and it just has not bothered to explain this to the patients who have this disease, is enraging. These people would have gladly sat in their bureaucracies with their information and allowed me to go blind.
After more than a year in court, Randall won the right to use marijuana as medicine. Now, the government supplies him with pot grown on a research farm at the University of Mississippi. But legal smokers are still an exceptional few. This is why Randall traveled from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco to join friends in support of Prop P.
It seems to us that this is a very critical measure. It's the first time that private citizens in the United States have been allowed through the ballot to express their opinions on this issue.
When we heard about Proposition P, it was just like a dream come true. And when we found marijuana and started using it and realized that, hey, this is a drug and it does have applications, our whole life changed. We were able to function. My wife quit throwing up. She started to gain weight back. Our lives turned around for the better.
After the polls had closed, Dennis held what he hoped would be a victory party for Proposition P.
Allowing marijuana to be used for medical purposes, that had 69% yes vote in the absentee. 74%.
With the absentee.
Well, I believe that this is the first step. I really do. I think this is the first step in legalizing cultivation. It's, we're still a long way from there, but I think we can de facto. We have to ignore the law, but I think we can.
Right, so where are the doctors,
if
they prescribe pot to the patient, where are they going to get the pot from?
We're going to have to grow it from
Nonsense. They've got all those stashes from eons back.
They got the stash. I got my stash.
From the police department.
They got my stash. No, we don't have anything to do with that pot. Right? It's tainted pot. It's fucked up pot. It's caused a lot of misery for people. Think of those people that got busted for that pot. We don't want anything to do with that pot.
Right, we want all new pot.
Fresh. Grown by green growers of San Francisco. People with green thumb. The FDA claimed they weren't going to give marijuana to any more AIDS patients because they said it was sending out the wrong signal. Well, my thought, what is that signal? What signal are they sending out? That this stuff is good for you? Well, it is good for them, and that's the wrong signal as far as they're concerned. In other words, they're willing to perpetuate their lies at the expense of sick people because they don't want to send out the wrong signal. Why say that they're using patients as pawns in their war against drugs?
You know, the one thing that our opponents never seem to get straight is we never declared war on America. They declared war on marijuana. You know, marijuana users never declare war on anybody.
I believe there's a gradual progression towards legalization or decriminalization in the foreseeable future. But I used to think that things were going to change in the next few years, 20 years ago, but here I am. This is more like 100 years war.
Say, did you ever meet that Reefer man?
No, I never met the guy. Tell me about it.
Oh, no, you're not kidding me now, are you? You never met the Reefer man? Oh, no, you never met the Reefer man? And yet you say you swim to China and you wanted to sell me South Carolina? I believe you know the Reefer man. Did you ever meet the funny Reefer man? You never met the funny Reefer man? And yet you say you walk the ocean anytime you take a notion? Yeah, I believe you've seen the Reefer man.